These Woodstock photos are not suitable for all ages. Some of them are too wild. Others reveal the real truth about what happened at one of the most talked about events in American history. And that truth is far more surprising than most people expect. On August 15, 1969, over 400,000 people made their way to a simple dairy farm in Bethel, New York. They came for music. They came for freedom. They came for something they could feel but not quite explain. What they got was something nobody had planned, nobody was ready for, and nobody would ever forget. Today we are going inside the real Woodstock through photos that most people have never truly understood. Stay with us, because this story gets stranger, messier, and more powerful than you can imagine. Let's start before the crowds arrived, before the music, before the chaos. There is a photo of a quiet green field, just open grass and blue sky, with a few workers setting up equipment in the distance. This was Max Yaska's dairy farm. Max was a local farmer, a quiet and straightforward man who had spent his whole life working this land. When the festival organizers came knocking and asked if they could use his property for a music event, he said yes. Not because he loved rock music, not because he was chasing fame or a big payday. He said yes because he genuinely believed in people. He believed young Americans deserved a place to come together and be heard. That one decision made him a legend. But it also cost him friendships, sparked lawsuits from angry neighbors, and turned his peaceful farm into the center of a national conversation. Max Yaska passed away in 1973, just 4 years after the festival, never fully realizing how deeply his name would be remembered. Now look at this photo showing a tall fence running along the edge of the festival grounds. At first glance it looks intimidating, like something built to keep people out. But the real story behind that fence is almost funny. The organizers had built it to sell tickets. Their entire plan was built around a crowd of about 50,000 people. Controlled, manageable, normal. But the people kept arriving in numbers nobody had predicted. The roads jammed up. The parking lots overflowed. People were climbing fences, cutting through fields, and flowing in from every direction. The governor of New York seriously considered calling in the National Guard. The local county declared a state of emergency. The organizers quickly realized they had two choices. They could fight the crowd or they could welcome it. They chose to welcome it. Woodstock became a free event almost overnight. And just like that, those intimidating fences became nothing more than decoration. But even getting to the farm was its own adventure. There is a photo showing a highway completely frozen solid. Not from ice or snow, but from cars. Thousands and thousands of cars stretching in every direction for as far as the camera could see. The roads leading to the farm had turned into the longest parking lot in history. Some people sat waiting for 6, 8, even 10 hours without moving an inch. Eventually, many of them gave up, parked wherever there was space, and started walking. Miles and miles on foot through the summer heat, carrying sleeping bags, tents, food, and everything else they thought they might need. Their faces were sunburned and tired. Their feet were sore. But not a single one of them turned around. Nothing was going to stop them from getting to Woodstock. Here is a detail that always gets a laugh. There is a photo of a young woman standing in the middle of the festival grounds holding a carton of milk. Regular dairy milk. At an outdoor summer festival, with no refrigerators anywhere nearby. It is a strange choice by any measure. Fresh milk and summer heat are not a good combination. But in a weird way, she fits perfectly into the Woodstock story. Nothing there went according to plan. People showed up with whatever they had and figured the rest out as they went along. That woman and her warm carton of milk are somehow the perfect symbol of the whole weekend. Now here is something that almost never gets mentioned when people talk about Woodstock. The cows. Max Yaska's farm was a working dairy operation before the festival, and it stayed a working farm during it. Photos show the cows standing in their fields while hundreds of thousands of humans camped and danced and made noise all around them. And those cows did not handle the situation well at all. The constant noise, the flashing lights at night, the music shaking the ground, the overwhelming smell and movement of so many people. It was simply too much for them. Reports from the time say the cows were so stressed by everything that they stopped producing milk for an entire month after the festival ended. A whole month. The farmer actually sought compensation from the organizers because of a lost production. There are even photos of farm workers trying to carry on with their daily milking routines right in the middle of the crowds, walking through seas of festival goers like it was just another ordinary workday on the farm. Then came the rain. There are photos that show exactly what happens when 400,000 people are camped on a farm and the sky decides to open up. The ground turns into something between thick mud and a shallow pond. Tents collapse. Shoes get sucked off feet. Everything becomes soaked and heavy and cold. And yet the faces in those photos tell a completely different story than you might expect. People are laughing, rolling in the mud on purpose, sliding around and throwing mud at each other like little kids who just discovered puddles. Some of the smarter attendees had packed plastic rain ponchos, which were not exactly the height of fashion in 1969, but they wore them happily and proudly. The rain did not break Woodstock. It just became part of it. People chose to have fun with the mud rather than be miserable about it. And that choice says everything about the kind of crowd that had gathered there. Sleeping was another story entirely. The farm had never been designed to house 400,000 people overnight. There were not nearly enough tents. There were not enough flat, dry spots on the ground. Photos from the festival show people sleeping literally everywhere. Curled up in the grass, stretched across the hoods of parked cars, huddled under plastic sheets tied between tree branches. One photo shows a man sleeping peacefully in his car with the window cracked open while the entire festival buzzes around him, completely unbothered. But buried within this part of the story is something genuinely heartbreaking. A young attendee who had been sleeping in a sleeping bag near one of the farm paths was accidentally run over by a tractor early one morning. The driver simply did not see him in the dark. It is one of the details that gets left out of the highlight reels, but deserves to be remembered. Now let us talk about something the organizers got badly wrong. Bathrooms. The festival had set up around 600 portable toilets for the event. 600. For over 400,000 people. If you do the math, that comes out to roughly one toilet for every 650 people. The lines were endless. The conditions were unpleasant in ways that are easy to imagine. Photos from inside the grounds show the reality of this with painful honesty. Long, winding queues of people waiting. People having quiet conversations while they waited, because there was simply nothing else to do. It was not pretty. It was not glamorous, but it was exactly what Woodstock was when you pulled back the curtain on the legend. There's a photo of a woman who had traveled all the way from Massachusetts to be at the festival. In the picture, she looks exhausted and uncertain, like someone who is quietly asking herself whether this trip was actually worth it. She had probably pictured something magical, and instead found herself knee-deep in mud with nowhere clean to sit, nothing good to eat, and a very long wait for the nearest bathroom. Her expression is one of the most honest photographs from the entire event. A reminder that even the most legendary moments in history have stretches where people are just plain uncomfortable and trying to keep their spirits up. One of the most mysterious images from Woodstock was captured by photographer Baron Wallman. It shows a single man walking through the crowd carrying a proper suitcase. Not a backpack, not a duffel bag. A real suitcase, the kind you bring to a hotel. The man is walking with clear purpose, clearly headed somewhere specific, completely unbothered by the thousands of people surrounding him. Wallman himself said it was the strangest thing he photographed all weekend. He had no idea where the man was going or what was inside the case. Nobody has ever figured it out. The photo just sits in Woodstock's history as a quiet reminder that 400,000 people each brought their own private story to that farm. And most of those stories we will never know. Here is something that genuinely surprises people when they first hear it. The United States Army was at Woodstock, and they were not there to shut it down. They were there to help. Military helicopters, the same kind used to transport soldiers in combat, were being used to fly in doctors, medical supplies, and even some of the performing artists who could not get through the traffic. This was all happening at the same moment that many of the people at the festival were holding up anti-war signs and chanting against the government. The organizers got on stage and spoke to the crowd directly, telling them that the soldiers helping out were doing it voluntarily, without pay, because they wanted to be part of something good. In the photos, you can see those army helicopters landing in open fields surrounded by people waving peace signs. It is one of the most complicated and most human images the festival produced. Before a single note of music was played, a man stepped onto the stage that most of the crowd had never heard of. His name was Swami Satchidananda, a spiritual teacher from India who had arrived in America just 3 years earlier. He led the crowd in chanting and spoke about peace, stillness, and living in harmony with the world. For many of the young Americans listening, it was their first real encounter with yoga, meditation, and Eastern ways of thinking. His presence at Woodstock helped plant seeds that would grow into a massive cultural shift in America over the following years. Today, millions of people practice yoga and meditation without knowing that one of the moments that first introduced those ideas to everyday American life was a speech on a muddy stage in rural New York in 1969. When the festival finally ended, the farm looked like a scene from a disaster movie. Mountains of garbage covered the hillsides. Abandoned tents, empty bottles, wet clothing, and food wrappers stretched out for what felt like miles in every direction. A newspaper article written shortly after described the cleanup taking weeks. Max Yaska quietly made the decision that he would never open his land to anything like this again. The town passed a law specifically designed to make sure nothing on this scale could ever happen there again. Even the place where Woodstock's spirit had burned brightest was left dealing with the very real and very messy consequences of what had occurred. But none of that mess, none of the garbage or the mud or the things that went wrong, could erase what had actually happened between the people who were there. When the music played and 500,000 people listened together under the same open sky, something shifted. Something real passed between strangers who had never met and would likely never see each other again. The early news coverage called it a disaster and focused entirely on the traffic and the chaos and the lack of toilets. But as time went on, the people who had been there started talking about how it actually felt. Journalists who had initially dismissed it began writing about what it meant for the country. A documentary was made capturing the music and the people and the mud, edited in part by a young filmmaker named Martin Scorsese, who was just getting a start. That film won an Academy Award and made sure the story of Woodstock would never be forgotten. 32 of the biggest names in music performed there. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Grateful Dead, Joe Cocker. Each performance became a piece of music history. And the bands that said no, the ones who turned down the invitation because they were tired of touring or thought it was just another outdoor show, spent years regretting it. The Byrds turned it down. The Doors turned it down. Both later admitted it was one of the worst decisions of their careers. Because what nobody fully understood at the time was that Woodstock was not just a concert. It was the moment a generation looked at itself and decided what it believed in. The photos taken over those 3 days are still being shared and talked about today. Each one holds a piece of a story far bigger than any single image can contain. A man walking with a suitcase nobody ever explained. A woman drinking warm milk in the summer heat. Confused cows in their own muddy fields. Army helicopters landing in a crowd of peace signs. Strangers handing food to other strangers. Children laughing at puppet shows while the world shifted around them. That is what these photos are really showing. Not the mess. Not the failures. Not the things that went sideways. They are showing what people are capable of when they decide, even just for a few days, to choose kindness over conflict and community over selfishness. And the reason we are still looking at these photos, still telling these stories more than 50 years later, is simple. Deep down, most of us are still hoping we can find a way to do the same thing. Make sure you subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of the real Woodstock story surprised you the most? We will see you in the next one.